Welcome to a weekly Wizardly Review. Every week we select works or content from the DM's Guild to review. This is where we break them down and see how it all fits together. We then evaluate them based on a few points. We go through lore, difficulty and implementation, balance, intrigue, and player draw. So today we are going to be reviewing, the first time I believe, a monster all by itself. This is the Pustule Serpent by... I don't want to mispronounce the name. You are much better with that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's by Igor Moreno.
Perfect. So, like I was saying, without further ado, today we are reviewing the Pustule Serpent by Igor Moreno. This is a CR 12 rating monster that is intended to be used at any table and is pay-what-you-want title. Igor has been a huge contributor to the DM's Guild with works such as these, and more on that later. But the Pustule Serpent is one of those creepy, deadly creatures that seeks to fill the CR void in the monster manual, so let's have a look. Starting off, we're going to be jumping into our lore section. Alright, so my first question goes to you. Is there character and or item lore?
Okay, so yes, indeed, there is great lore that is baked into this monster. Its abilities are derived from its lore and vice versa. Mm-hmm. This is a note for the intrigue section on how it reads and a bit on balance. But I know that Igor's mother tongue is Portuguese, and you are able to kind of see that in the document itself with like the presence of grammatical errors, and these might make the lore somewhat harder to grasp for some. But alas, the lore in and of itself of the creature is really cool. What about you, James?
The creature lore here is really well done. How it propagates, its interactions with civilization to an extent, and the lore wasn't dense, it wasn't really hard to chew through, and it was just really well done all around. Easily consumed.
Yeah.
Eric?
I completely agree with what you say, so then that just leads me to ask you, is there locational lore?
Locational lore. To a degree, yes. Igor has designed this creature to live within a specific environment, which does kind of lend to its locational lore, I'd say, in my objective opinion.
Okay.
Eric?
Yeah, you know what? I'll agree with you on this one. I see this as being similar to those creatures from the hilarious kind of the Tremors movie.
Oh, yeah.
Mixed with the mechanics of a dragon. Okay. Something in the hills, the swamps, canyons, or caves, in whatever setting that you're running. James?
Okay, well then my question to you, which is kind of a silly one, is there an overall plot?
No. It's a standalone monster. There aren't any guidelines or recommendations on how to implement it at your table. So Igor does leave that solely on the DM's shoulders, but so James?
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I do see your point there. And you know what? I think you really hit that one. I don't think I need to build on that one. All right, so I'm going to pass it back to you.
All right, fair enough. So this is going to be an interesting question for you, James.
Okay.
But how is the adventure hook, if there is one for this monster?
Well, honestly, no, but that's okay because it's a monster. When reviewing this, I did not expect for any hook or tie-in for lore. I mean, just because this is a monster add-on, Eric,
yeah, like
your thoughts?
Honestly, James, 110% agree. There isn't one offered, and I just want to point that out. It's fine. You don't have to. But if you do score extra points with us because based on our objective criteria, it makes it easier to implement at a table, especially one that has lesser experienced DMs or players.
Exactly.
So, James?
Okay, so I believe this is our final question here. Does it have any tie-offs or loose ends?
Oh. well, James, same as the previous question. Honestly, I'm good. Back to you, buddy.
oh, okay. You know what? Agreed. In all honesty, we knew this section of the review would be really short and sweet, and that any points in this section are strictly bonus. So hats off to Igor for all the wonderful work he did. Do we have another question here, Eric?
Yeah. Would you say, does it fit in the pre-established D&D lore? the Pustule Serpent?
You know, sometimes this is difficult to say, but in this case, I'd say so. I'd honestly feel like this creature fits into a family tree kind of along the lines of a purple worm and a basilisk-esque kind of monster family. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, 110% I agree with you, James. I think you explained it really well with kind of how this creature is and where it would fit. I think that it fits a niche and a style that is missing in the game. And something that is new, and it takes a chance. So I really have to commend Igor for coming up with something that's a little bit more unique. So James, I think that's going to bring us to our wizardly rating. Personally for me, based on objective criteria, personal opinions out of there, and the NAs out of there, I gave it a 6 out of 10.
Absolutely. I gave it a 6 out of 10 as well. So since this is kind of one of those situations where it's one of the lowest scores we've given something, I want to just take a few seconds to elaborate.
Yeah.
Why did it get a 6 out of 10? So a 10 out of 10 scale, 1 would be terrible, atrocious, something bad. 5 is what you would normally get.
Average.
The average stuff from Wizards of the Coast or just the DM's Guild in general.
100%.
So when you have a 6, it's above average.
It is. Yep.
Because Igor went above and beyond to give how this creature reacts to civilization.
Yep.
How it continues its species, and
yeah, exactly. Like, he gave an entire page with that sort of background information, which is it's a lot more fleshed out than some monsters get in the monster manual.
Exactly.
But for the most part, it's typically like about a page or 2 pages for that. So it's kind of, again, just slightly above average.
Exactly.
And I liked how he explained the personality traits of the monster, and then how those were instantaneously related to its mechanics.
Exactly.
That's why I really liked it. But again, just going off of what James is saying, is that with some of the grammatical errors, it just could have been a little bit more polished, could have been edited or given to somebody who could have picked those things up. So that's a minor gripe, but I mean, objectively speaking, we have to ding it some points for that.
Yeah.
And why it just scored an above average score, but it is still great. It's a great monster, and the lore that is there is very intriguing, like we mentioned in our responses.
Yeah, and to wrap it up, just to recap that, any points that it did score here are strictly bonus. I mean, we debated on whether or not we should even do a lore section for monster reviews.
Yeah, exactly.
And
other than just saying an NA and carrying on into difficulty.
Exactly.
Right? So, yeah, 110%. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, hats off, Igor. Wonderful job. And
you went beyond the Call of Duty on this one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for anyone watching this, give it a look. I mean, just the artwork itself, it really lends to the what's going on, like, ooh, here.
Yeah.
Right. It's
and
really well done.
It is. I gotta say, yeah. And that will go into the intrigue section too. But absolutely, the lore for the Pustule Serpent.
6 out of 10.
Yeah, it's a solid score from us.
Absolutely. And we'll see you in difficulty.
All right. Alrighty, so carrying on into the difficulty and implementation. So, James, how much study was required of the DM to implement this?
Not a whole lot. Really, it might take a few minutes to skim through and figure out how you want to utilize this creature in a fight, but this is truly a great plug-and-play creature. Eric, what are your thoughts on this?
I agree. This is extremely easy to pick up, crunch the stat blocks, and then the fleshing out of the creature itself and balancing the difficulty of the creature is where the skill level does increase depending on the skill level of the DM.
Exactly.
So those are my thoughts. James?
Okay, so my question that I will toss to you is, how much study was needed for players?
Well, considering that this is something you spring on them, there should be none. unless they go out of their way to study up on the creature in the character's downtime.
Right.
James?
So I do have a few thoughts on this, and I will get into it a little bit later, but agreed. This has some decent versatility because of the lore. So as a DM, you could say this is an investigation, notice board kind of encounter, and you had to study up on it just before the fight.
Yeah, no, that's actually really good. I didn't ever thought about that. All right, that leads me to my next question. Were or should there have been some charts, tables, DM, player guidelines?
Honestly, I think the ads that spawn from the monster itself should have had a little more detail in how they're utilized in combat. Referencing the mob guidelines or some such, just because it could really bog down combat. But otherwise, I really think it's great work. Maybe just a little reference to the ads.
Gotcha, for sure. Yeah, I'd say just the stat blocks, definitely limited. We're going to talk about this a little bit more anyways,
Yep.
So James, I'm going to let you carry us on.
Okay, so my question for you is, what was the level of in-game difficulty?
Okay, so I would say that the Pustule Serpent varies across the spectrum of the difficulty scale from an average to a deadly encounter. Now, there are some gripes that we have about this.
Yes.
But I'm gonna let you touch on that, James. You go ahead.
Okay, so I feel this really varies based on group composition. We will delve into the nuts and bolts of this a little bit later, but it can prove very difficult for groups within the challenge rating range. But with that said, let's move on. Eric?
Okay, so how would you say integrating this into a pre-existing campaign or worlds be?
Honestly, I think this is super easy. The lore helped make it very fluid to transition this creature into almost any setting. Job really, really well done, Igor. What about you? What are your thoughts?
Okay, no, 110% I agree with you. Depending on where your campaign is taking place, you might not even encounter this creature. However, many DMs could easily find a way to work around that by introducing an environment where this creature could survive and be encountered by your group. So that what's the next question there, James?
Okay, so this question is the one where we hit it on the head. Who or what type of party is this geared towards, and how hard is it to mesh into other group types?
All right. I just took a second wind there, folks. So, I ultimately think, without going on a crazy tirade here, it's for groups that like a serious challenge in regards to combat. For groups that are more RP focused, and especially first time groups who don't know how to circumvent things like resistances, how to buff their own party members, or how to take care of ads with AoE spells. All these sort of wargaming terms, at the end of the day, that's why, wargamers, power gamers, and metagamers, I think, will really dig this, because it's something new and different from all the monsters that they already have memorized from the monster manual. Yeah. James?
Honestly, I agree. This is definitely geared towards more of a combat-focused group that wants a new challenge. However, if you want to tackle this on the RP side of things, as a DM, you could make this a big game hunt type of encounter. I might dabble with this a little bit later, but to summarize, it's a good change of pace for the combat enthusiasts. So go check it out. I'll pass it back to you.
All right, fair enough. So finally, what was the payoff in-game and out-of-game?
Oh, okay. See, I love this about the big game hunt kind of creatures. Who doesn't love being able to say, we fought a new monster and trounced it? Or, we fought desperately against insurmountable odds. The payoff in game is truly in the reputation that comes with killing a monster of this caliber. Out of game is the memories and the experiences of fighting a new monster for the first time, and how that changes your group or playstyle after the encounter. That's my take, at least, Eric.
Wow. Like, frick, James. Like, honestly, that was the perfect answer for this. Guys, please just rewatch that for a moment, because, folks, that's what D&D at its core is all about. How combat, like, that's how combat is supposed to affect you psychologically at the table. Absolutely. Hell yeah, man!
Absolutely.
All right, so that's going to bring us again to our wizardly rating for this one. James, take her away. What do we got for difficulty and implementation?
For difficulty and implementation, it got an 8 out of 10. Now, to quickly touch on some of the points that I deducted, the ads should have had their own stat block. I know Igor did reference certain things in the monster manual that kind of take the stats of those creatures.
Yes.
But I think for the sake of this creature specifically, it should have been encountered, like we've mentioned before. If it's a part of this module,
yep,
you should have it with the module.
Yep.
Right? Even if it's just a quick reference little stat block cutout.
Yep.
The other thing is potentially a quick guideline on how the ads take initiative and react in combat.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to try... no, thank you for controlling yourself on that one. We're going to leave it for the spoiler discussion at the end of this video. It's not going to be a full spoiler-length review like some of our other ones that we've done, but just a spoiler talk, because it's just mainly around that one element of this creature.
Kind of an FYI for DMs who are going to pick this up.
Exactly. So we're going to leave that for there, but that's exactly where it lost just as a couple of the points for us on difficulty of implementation, is just because you're just missing a couple of those elements that James mentioned, and that also leads back into just how it's written as well and how it reads. Yep. At the end of the day, there's, like I said, it is solely on the DM's shoulders to implement that, and that is why it scored an 8 out of 10 for me, is because it's not as, easy as it could be, but at the same time, it is a monster. Any DM worth his salt should be able to know how to implement a monster. I mean, whether or not how that goes is something totally different.
Absolutely.
Than what is for our balance section. So that's why, it got an 8 out of 10 for us in terms of the difficulty to implement, because there was some difficulty. But this is still above average and
Absolutely.
something that you can pick up and plug in
Yep.
to your game.
Absolutely. So that brings our difficulty section to a close. We will see you in balance. Alrighty, welcome to balance. So, is the lore balanced within the work? That's your first question.
Okay, just gonna digest this for a momentito. I think that it is fairly balanced, I have to say. If not slightly underbalanced.
Yeah.
But again, there doesn't need to be a lot of lore for a plug-and-play monster.
Exactly.
Right? However, since the lore of the creature informs and affects its stats and its mechanics, and that in turn affects the players at the table when it's used in play, you gotta keep that in mind. Again, you see how all these pillars lean on each other. So one note I had was the blister poison being unbalanced, as well as the mechanics surrounding the broods like we've mentioned before in the adult version. We are going to talk about this more anyways, so James, what about you?
Alright, on face value, yeah, the way the lore helps foster encounters in specific regions and how broad that temperature range could be does make it really easy to incorporate as a spontaneous encounter or a, like I've said, a big game hunt. But otherwise, I really agree with your statement here, Eric. So, next question.
Gotcha. No. So, how was the combat or the non-combat situations balanced for this creature?
Okay, well,
Yeah.
half that question is a little iffy.
Yeah.
Well, there really aren't any non-combat situations just due to the nature of this product being a monster and solely based on combat. However, with regards to the combat, I've said it before, but it could use a few more tweaks. But it is still a very well put together creature for each CR rating, respectively.
Yep.
Honestly, okay, what are your thoughts here, Eric?
All right, yeah. I have to agree with you, James, on all that you've said. There would need to be some tweaks needed in regards to balance of some aspects, like we've already mentioned in depth. And especially in regards to the non-combat encounter, unfortunately, that's DM dependent, right?
Yeah.
As they might not have much to go off other than the little bit of lore that we get surrounding the creature and where it tends to reside. So,
exactly.
Yeah. What's next for us, James?
Okay, the next question is, were the mechanics of fights, items, encounters balanced and flexible?
Well, James, I'm really struggling to try and keep this answer short. So, in short, I'll say that ultimately it is sufficiently balanced when we're thinking about the power levels of a party that's going up against this creature. I don't know if I could say the same about it being super flexible in regards to the brood mechanics, especially when we're talking about the power. The initiative order, and like I said, the need for mob rules to govern it. I'm gonna leave it there. We're gonna talk about it anyways. God, that was tough, James.
Okay, so to build on that, I do have a few gripes with this in regards to this. However, first, the mechanics are fairly balanced, and they are appropriate for the CR rating.
Yep.
However, like I mentioned before, the ads that spawn from the monster could have used more information to help balance that fight out. But that's my feeling, at least. Overall, though, it's easily worked through, and through, it's great. But let's move along to our next question here, Eric.
Gotcha. So my question, is the reward to the in-game difficulty ratio appropriate?
You know, I'd say so. Based on the XP gained from the encounter at both CR rating levels, and the ways I'd try to find loot from the corpse, make profit or memorabilia from it, like taking a tooth or two, fashioning a dagger, or take some hide for a nice belt. So yeah, I'd say the in-game payoff is appropriate. How about you?
Well, number one, I just want to say that I think those are some really good ideas with what to use it for. I agree with you completely on this one as well. This is what makes this creature worth all the risk of fighting in the first place, especially if the players are told or know prior the high value of this creature's poison. That alone makes this creature a lucrative payoff in and of itself, outside of, any additional NPC bounty that's been given for it.
Exactly.
So, you know what, for me, that's just going to bring us right into the wizardly rating. James, what do you think in terms of balance for this Pustule Serpent?
So, like I said in the last section, there are a few things that took some points away. So I'm going to touch on those, but quickly I'm going to say it's still a really great monster. I look forward to fighting this thing or implementing it myself as a DM further.
Yeah.
Go check it out. But my gripes for the balance come with how the brood mechanic works. Now, to quickly dab into that one without going down the rabbit hole.
Right, because we're leaving that for the end, folks. So hang in there if you want to check it out.
Missed attacks have a chance at bursting the pustules you can see on its body.
Correct. That have the broods that we're talking about in them.
And each of those takes on a stat block of, I believe...
At the lower level, it's...
like a python of some kind
yes,
or something?
Yes, it's a poisonous snake.
Yes.
And then at the higher CR, it's the constrictor snake stats.
So it does get a little dodgy. Although you could take a note from, I believe it was 4th edition, have minions, so make them one-shots to balance it yourself.
Yeah.
But, again, rabbit hole. Those were some of the things that I docked for balance because the amount of brood that spawn at the high tier, holy cats.
That's what drives that up, and that's why we mentioned on difficulty of implementation, or I believe it actually was balance. Forgive me if I'm mistaken, but that's what drives it across the spectrum so much, and why it could be, depending on the group composition, like we talked about, could be an average, encounter that you roll through pretty quickly, and we'll touch on that more later, or absolutely deadly.
Yeah.
Especially if these things are being governed by individual stats and turn orders and initiative, and if they have reactions. But the thing is, we don't have that information. Igor didn't provide it to us, and that's what really
nailed this one.
Yeah, that docked us points, because objectively speaking, we can't say that it's entirely balanced or perfectly balanced. Mind you, it's above average because its stats and its lore are fairly balanced, and for the challenge rating of itself and how it works as a creature. But definitely in terms of the mechanics and how it plays out at the table is where it really started to get jaggedy for us, and that's why we had to dock it the marks. But it would be really easy for a DM to solve these issues right off the gates as it is right now, and it would be really easy for Igor to go back and just retroactively update this. So that's why I gave it a 7.5 out of 10, is because I think it's something that is manageable.
Absolutely. So that'll bring us to our end in the balance section with a 7.5 out of 10, and we will see you in player intrigue, and then to finally top off with our gloves off DM session.
We'll see you there.
All right, intrigue and player draw. So the first question gets fired off to you, good sir. What about this product caught your eye?
All right. Well, I liked the cover art. I know I'm sounding like a broken record on this one, but the creature art was honestly very captivating. It drove my imagination forward, and it aligned well with the textual descriptions that Igor had written out for it. Plus, it's different than most things that you find out there. Like, I mean, just take a look. But anyways, how about you, James?
You know what? I agree. The artwork is great. It matches with the description quite well, like you said, and definitely showcases this creature's deadly capability. Now, for our last question, Eric.
Alrighty. So, when looking through the product description, what told you that this product was right for your table?
Oh gosh, golly gee, gotta think about this one. I'm totally I'm kidding. God, the fact that this was a niche monster fitting into a relatively slim pool of challenge rating encounters, that really kind of sums it up for me. What about you, Eric?
Yeah, I have to agree with that point of yours. 110%. This fills a void that Igor was able to spot, and I mean this in terms of CR rating 12 and 6 creatures. I think there's only 3 CR rating 12 creatures in the monster manual, and he was able to make one that is unique, and it brings something new and a bit challenging to the game. So I think in that spirit of creativity, that's what most established groups are looking for, to add some extra spice into their games. So James, what would you give Intrigue
for our wizardly rating?
Yeah.
I'd have to give this a solid 8 out of 10 for the Intrigue. The reason it got an 8 out of 10 for me was I believe there was only a handful of pictures altogether. I would have liked to see the artwork elaborated a little bit more. But overall, an image of the brood or the broodlings,
yes,
would have been kind of nice to have.
Nice to have, yeah.
But at the same time,
yeah, no, honestly, the art that is there is phenomenal. Really gets your imagination going, like I said, and it matches seamlessly with the mechanics of the creature. Like everything, like what you see is actually what you end up getting, in terms of what this creature is about, what it can do. So in that regards, really hats off to Igor there and the artist for that. You know, the layout of the document was pretty straightforward.
Yep.
The textual descriptions, like we said, is the only thing, you know, going back to what I mentioned about in lore, you know, his mother tongue is not English, and it does show. So that for me is what, objectively speaking, dinged the quality on in terms of like Intrigue, and when we're talking about like, you know, the layout and
the face value observation.
Exactly, and it's such it's the section that I like to talk about sometimes the least because it is something that is very vain, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we're just going off of objective criteria set by the industry standards, essentially, and what you should come to expect from DM's Guild products and materials. So at the end of the day, yeah, that's why it's still way above average. It's a very good job at an 8 out of 10, especially for it being only 6 pages long.
Right.
Which is more than enough for a monster. So, I mean, yeah,
absolutely.
Right.
Anything else to add?
No, I was just gonna say.
Okay.
Oh wait, yeah, I was just gonna say this. So yeah, that's the end of our intrigue section, and I'm just gonna launch into the usual spiel before we go into our spoiler talk here. But go check out Pustule Serpent. We highly recommend it. It's indicative of the work that Igor has done. Like we mentioned at the beginning, he's done a lot for the DM's Guild, and a lot of it has all been pay what you want, so essentially for free. He's got really good stuff. Check out the links below for links to his work. As always, the links to all of our social media are down below as well. And then I'm just gonna launch into our final rating for the Wizardly rating, the composite rating, and then we will
jump into our gloves off session.
Exactly right after that. So James, our composite score for the Pustule Serpent, I put, using the averaging it all out, at a 7.5 out of 10.
That is exactly the number.
Just before you launch in, I'll just say that is gleefully above average.
Absolutely. So for a creature, having a 7.5 out of 10 is, I'd say it's difficult. Yeah. Because I'd say 7.5 out of 10, or like 8s out of 10 would be like the dragons that Wizards of the Coast has made.
Yeah, especially when it's at such a higher CR level, and there's so much more that you need to try and balance out and take into account when creating a creature that can be challenging at such a high level.
Exactly. And honestly, like where this sits in our objective criteria, and aside from that, personal opinions, I would put it along the same playing field as, dragons, liches, things like that, that kind of have that little bit more fleshed out life to them. And obviously dragons, because Dungeons and Dragons,
of
right?
course.
They're going to be the best of the best,
I
but
agree.
it still sits in that pantheon.
I agree. I think this is a really strong creature that doesn't have the potential for roleplay. Can be.
Yeah.
What do I mean by that is, like, things like you mentioned, dragons, liches, all these other sort of creatures, are able to communicate with the players, and thus there's a whole nother pillar of D&D that is accessible to players, being the role-playing pillar. However, with this one, I think it's as strong as a kind of combat-based monster can be, because it's an interesting creature that's not like anything else exactly out there already. It brings something new to the table, and for that I have to say that's very brave, and that should always be commended in terms of just the idea, the theme that comes with it. And then, like I said, the mechanics, although we're going to talk more about that later, the mechanics are still something that's brave, something that's new.
Yeah.
And what really adds to the terror of this creature. And like you said, I liked how you kind of put it in with the basilisk and purple worm kind of family, because this is something, like I said, that is kind of unlike anything else that we've seen, a kind of an amalgamation of different styles. It's cool. I
Absolutely.
Like it. I would run it.
110% to steal your line.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to tune in for what we're about to do with the gloves off DM session, this is the end of our wonderful video, and we'll see you through the rift. However, for those of you sticking around, take those gloves off. Ding ding.
All right. Okay. All right. I'm gonna launch into this.
Yeah.
Essentially, where the majority of our spoiler conversation is going to be based about, and it's especially useful for all you DMs out there. Like I said, if you're a player and you're listening to this, turn this video off. We'll see you through the rift. Bye bye. But balance. balance and how it relates to difficulty of implementation, it's honestly all the notes are the same, and that's why we were kind of repeating ourselves a little bit on those questions. Is ultimately, let's get gloves off about this. At CR12, especially the adult one, these broods that are, I mean, the concept is phenomenal. I want it to work, but the problem is, as it's written by Igor, it's not. It doesn't work. Because if you roll the dice on this one, you could have a potential of 24 broods. There's no guidelines onto whether what the initiative order is.
But if you take the initiative from those constrictor snakes and what they can do,
yes. And I believe that it was mentioned that they go on the Pustule Serpent's turn. James, explain why this is not good.
Okay. So, put it in perspective. Let's take that 24, because that was the max number.
Yes, max.
We'll half it. Right? So we go 12 constrictor snakes, each doing an average of 1d6 damage.
Correct, and they have an AC of 13 and 82 hit points, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Could be wrong.
So CR12, you're around what level? I believe it's you're close to like 10th level. Around there.
CR12, so CR12, you know...
Or does that directly translate?
It directly translates.
Okay, yeah.
It's like, essentially what they're saying is like an average group, so a group of about 4 people at level 12 encountering this one creature.
I just needed that refresher.
No
It's been a while since I've tackled the CR stuff.
Okay.
So you have 12 constrictor snakes, all doing an average of just basic bite attacks range from 1d6 to 1d8.
Yeah.
Not to mention poison. So there's at least a +2 there.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you have their grapples.
Yeah.
Which then puts you at disadvantage.
Yeah.
And then this thing can grapple you. So 12 attacks.
All on one turn.
Plus the Pustule Serpent,
itself,
which will do an AoE.
Yeah, exactly, because it has its Blister Poison spew ability at CR12.
And in case you were trying to get clever just now and thinking, oh, it's an AoE, it's splash damage, it'll hurt the other ones. It specifically says the broods are immune to the acid.
Yeah, because it's part of them. They literally grow in these pustules of poison on the creature itself.
And whenever the pustules bursts, you have an area damage effect.
Correct.
That for anyone within 5 feet of the pustule, when it bursts, you take damage.
Acid.
So 12 bursts, and then they attack.
Needless to say, just from the bursts, if you were a very unfortunate tank, that could drop you.
Yep.
Right there, that's one person down. And then, say it was the Pustule Serpent's turn next, right? With all of its brood members, with a party, depending on the composition, and this is where James and I mentioned this, and we've really firmly said it. You know, it does depend on your party composition, but if the rest of your party, outside of that tank, are all casters, like, I want to be respectful, but they'd be fucked. They'd be dead.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that in a sense, right? It's a really tough, crazy tough encounter. Yeah. If that's something that you want in your game, as it is, then by all means, go ahead.
Yep.
Run it that way. But in our opinion, it's not balanced because...
We also forgot to mention the fact it has damage resistances to bludgeoning and piercing.
At that level, high CR level.
Plus an immunity to acid.
Yes. When it's younger, it just has the acid and bludgeoning.
So slashing and a vulnerability to cold. So this is where we get into our group composition.
Yes.
So we were like, okay, how do I want to be able to one-shot this creature?
Is it possible? Because again, that's how we think. On the flip side, can this creature one-shot a party versus can the party beyond easily one-shot it?
To make sure that it's balanced and that you can't do either one
in its totality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I believe we looked at we put together a Dragonborn was it wizard or sorcerer?
Wizard or sorcerer, like a wizard and a sorcerer in the party, but
Yeah.
one of them being a Dragonborn.
Yeah, with twin spell and Cone of Cold, I think it was.
Yeah, twin spell and empowered spell as your meta magics, and you use Cone of Cold cast at the highest level that you could at that level, which would be 5th level. That plus if you were a Dragonborn that had like you're
a cold breath or ice breath.
Yeah, the cold breath weapon that you could use as a bonus action after doing that. Plus, like I said, the cold damage from the breath weapon, and then I believe, like I said, if the wizard just threw a couple other another Cone of Cold themselves,
I want to say
or
Ice Spike, but I don't know.
Yeah,
If that's...
no, that's it. Yeah,
yeah.
Ice Spike, or even just Ray of Frost, or
oh god.
Long story short, that like
those two
casters going back to back, it's done. It's done.
It is the
because
amount of the average damage we worked out.
Yeah,
killed it.
Absolutely, because you're doubling the damage because it is vulnerable to cold damage, right? Let alone if they crit.
Oh god. Yeah, if it crits, the thing just I would just be like, it breaks like a curtain.
Yeah, literally, they would just be frozen solid, and you just the barbarian, if there was one, would just take its hammer and just smash. Yep. Again.
On the flip side,
is this fair, and does this really stroke the things of your characters? Maybe. And if that's something that you're cool with,
give her juice. But here's the other kick. If you are in a group without a caster, without cold weapons or cold damage, you're dead.
Pretty much.
Flat and pure simple.
And on top of that, there's a good chance that you could still make it.
You have to have a raging barbarian.
You have to have a raging barbarian, but here's the main one: is you'd actually have to have a cleric and a paladin.
Yes.
And I'm gonna tell you why. Because they got those access to those spells of protection from poison and cure disease and things of that nature. That will allow you to buff your party to be able to resist the crazy amount of poison damage that would come from this. And as a paladin, innately you would be immune to the poison. That helps. That does help. But still.
Ouch.
Yeah. The brood, especially at the higher level, the higher CR level, the broods, man, like...
Yeah, like, even if they only do 1d6 plus 2 each, that's a minimum of 3 damage times 12.
Yeah.
So you're looking at 36 points of damage, plus whatever the the Pustule Serpent does.
Yeah, from its bite attacks.
And it gets 2 attacks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a brutal creature to fight. Like I said, on the flip side, it could also be one-shotted. Like I said, it's so very circumstantial. That's so much about what D&D is about, and that's why, like, hats off to everybody and anybody who's ever created a creature, a character that, you know, that's the hardest thing to do. I think it's a lot easier to create player options and like subclasses and things like that, because you know how to create things that will be balanced for a player to do against creatures. But to create creatures knowing what the players can do, that's so much harder. So much harder. So still, hats off to Igor for even attempting this. I just think that he could have gone and done the extra work to come up with some unique stats for the broods.
Yeah.
And if he implements the mob mechanics, and what I mean by that is it's been established for, there's rules for doing mass combat in 5th edition. You should go check that out. I believe it's on the Dungeons & Dragons, like, FAQ. And I know that it's been done on the DM's Guild. I just am drawing a blank in terms of who did it. But there's resources out there for that. And you desperately would need to incorporate that into the brood mechanics of this creature here, so that it will be a fair and balanced fight, where, you know, the broodlings kind of have like their own initiative, all as their own, and they could take reactions, because that would be a way that the Pustule Serpent then has some sort of defensive capability, rather than just allowing itself to get whacked to death. And that way you still benefit from all the thematical bonuses and the lore surrounding the broods and that mechanic, but in a way that is balanced and fair against a player party.
Absolutely. And the one last thing I want to bring up is, just in case you're going, oh my goodness, how many broods can this thing pop out? It is a stagnant number. Once that number is reached, you can't create any more broods.
Correct, exactly. You literally just roll for it as the DM on how many pustules it'll have, and that's how many that it has. After they're popped, that's it. No regeneration.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about the ads once you've taken care of them.
Yeah. But goodness forbid you do an area attack as a fighter or a rogue, and you hit multiple spots, because your chances of actually bursting quite a few at one time
Goes up.
is really dangerous.
Yeah.
Because, and just to quickly build on how we said it could one-shot some players or characters, is, yeah, you stand there and you burst like 3 or 4 of these.
Especially if you're a smaller group.
Yeah. You could literally disintegrate a character right there from the acid, and then the immediate reaction the creature gets. And then on its turn, if you're doing each individual snake, you can have your entire party immobilized, grappled, and poisoned all at once, and with acid damage, and just oh my goodness.
It's very overwhelming. And that's why we have to say, we had to say objectively, that's why it got a 7.5 in balance for us, because that section, that area around the broodlings is very unbalanced on both sides of the spectrum. For the creature itself as well as for the players that face it. So it's just something that is objectively there, and something, but like we mentioned earlier in that part of balance, it's something that can easily be remedied and worked upon by the DM and by Igor if he wishes to so go back and update. So know that those other tools are readily available for you to readily still use and incorporate this at your table, which we both recommend doing because it's so worth it for the lore that is surrounding this creature.
All right, well, that brings us to the final section of our Gloves Off DM session. Thank you for listening, and we will see you
through the rift.